Doctorow is a special consultant from the Electronic Frontier Foundation. He's also a science fiction novelist, a blogger, a technology activist. He's the co-editor of the popular web Boing Boing. Who's heard of Boing Boing? There you go. Got some followers. And a contributor to The Guardian, Publishers Weekly, Wired, and many other newspapers, magazines, and websites. He's a special consultant to the Electronic Frontier Foundation, a nonprofit civil liberties group that defends freedom in technology, law, policy, standards, and treaties. I'm getting off the stage so you can listen to Cory. He's a fascinating person. Hang tight.
That's kind of you. Thank you. Thank you very much. How are my levels? You can hear me. All right. So there's a bit of a formality, given that I'm the last speaker of the day. I'm sorry to have to do this. But as a member in good standing of the Society of After Dinner and Conference Speakers of England, Scotland, and Wales, and as the last speaker of the day, I'm required to make a joke about being the person between you and the booze. This is that joke. Thank you. Sorry. They make me do it. Union rules. So you know that computers are now everywhere. The Internet of Things is the Internet of the metastatic computer. A car is a computer you put your body into, and then it whisks you down the highway at 60 miles an hour, and you pray doing what you hope to do. You know, those tall, willowy skyscrapers that have colonized the financial centers of all the world's great cities. You look at them and you think, how does such a Seussian construct stay upright when it's so tall and willowy? The way that it does it is it's filled with seismic dampers, huge masses of concrete and water directed by computers so that it can lean back into the wind, lean back into seismic stress. Bankers work in case mods, right? A skyscraper is a computer we put the finance industry inside of. If you follow the North Hollywood shutdown of a hospital thanks to ransomware, you've discovered that a hospital is a computer we put sick people inside of. If you are like me and you've logged a lot of punishing earbud hours, you know that someday you're going to have a computer inside of your head, because your hearing aid is not going to be a beige, retro, hipster, analog, transistorized hearing aid. It's going to be a general purpose computer. It'll be Turing complete. It'll be inside your head. It'll have the power to know what you're hearing, to tell other people what you're hearing, to change what you're hearing, to stop you from hearing things, or to make you hear things that aren't there. If you went to CES this year, you saw that the Internet of Things has colonized your colon, right? This is the IoT connected rectal thermometer. We now have computers up the ass. It's the year 2016. And so you knew before I started telling you that there were computers everywhere, But what you may not realize is that means that there are copyrighted works everywhere, and that those copyrighted works are covered by the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, a law that's not quite as old as the All Writs Act, but any piece of technology that dates back to 1998 is well past its sell-by date, and that includes technology law. And the Digital Millennium Copyright Act is an extremely vivid example of what happens when you don't patch your code, and it's the law of the land. So in 1998, Congress passed the DMCA, and you'll know the DMCA. It's this long, gnarly hairball of copyright law. It is the author of all your favorite YouTube videos. This video was removed thanks to a claim from the DMCA, right? You love the DMCA. The DMCA also has this controversial section, Section 1201, that makes it a felony to remove a DRM, a digital lock that restricts access to a copyrighted work. It also makes it a felony to disclose vulnerabilities in digital locks, because if you know about a flaw, a defect in a digital lock, then you also know where to start jailbreaking that digital lock. And when the DMCA kicked off, the only people who were subject to this punishing liability, a $500,000 fine and a 5-year prison sentence for a first offense, were people who were attacking entertainment systems, because they were the ones who were using digital locks. If you had a DVD player, you would use a digital lock to make sure people couldn't parallel import DVDs from another country and play it on a DVD player they bought in the United States. So you could segment your product offerings around the world. And there were lots of manufacturers who were really interested in the potential of the DMCA to allow them to maximize their profits. You may know a company called Lexmark. They make laser toner cartridges. Back then they were a division of IBM. And in the early 2000s, they attacked one of their competitors, a company called Static Controls. Ironically, Static Controls now owns Lexmark. They attacked Static Controls, and they said, when you remanufacture our toner cartridges, you violate our copyright. And that's because we have a single bit inside the toner cartridge. When the toner cartridge is empty, that bit sits at 0. If you refill the toner cartridge without setting that bit to 1, the printer won't print with it. And so static controls figured out how to defeat the software lock and flip that bit back to 1. So they said, you're violating our copyright when you flip that bit back to 1. And the Federal Circuit said, well, you know, I've had a good old look at your toner cartridges, and I can't find the copyrighted work that your DRM protects, right? Is it this bit? Is it this one bit? You've copyrighted a bit? A 0 or a 1, that's not what we mean when we say a digital lock that protects copyright has this force of law. But a funny thing happened on the way to the 21st century, which is that everything got an operating system. And so whether or not Lexmark's toner cartridges had copyrighted works inside of them in 2002, 2003, it's really clear that all of the devices we have today have copyrighted works in them that are indisputable, right? When you get a light bulb for Christmas from a well-meaning relative that has a TCP IP stack, a Wi-Fi access point, and a Bluetooth radio, the idea that that doesn't have a copyrighted work inside of it just doesn't pass the giggle test. I mean, if that's not a copyrightable work, then the GPL is invalid, right? Because if you can't copyright an operating system, then you don't. Then what is the basis for having a license that requires people who contribute to GNU Linux to give back their changes, to spread their changes? And what happened in the years since 1998 is the U.S. Trade Representative went all around the world and became patient zero in a global epidemic of incredibly dumb internet laws. Every country that is engaged in significant trade with the United States has been arm-twisted into adopting its own version of the DMCA. In Europe, they passed the EUCD in 2001, which was implemented in law in the UK, where I've been living for the last decade, in 2003. In Canada, where I'm from, the Conservative government passed Bill C-11 in 2011, which is particularly galling and embarrassing for me as a Canadian, because it's one thing to make stupid mistakes about the internet in 1998. That's when we thought that giant VR hamlets would be cool, and as we know today, those will never catch on. But if you're still making dumb mistakes about the internet in 2011, you're just not paying attention, right? That's like beyond an error of omission and straight into felony stupid. And as the world has adopted laws making it a felony to tamper with digital locks on devices that have copyrighted works inside of them, the number of devices that have digital works inside of them has gone asymptotic to infinity. Now, the thing that we find out when we examine the use of digital locks in our everyday technology is that this law is not an anti-piracy law, and it never has been and never can be. DRM doesn't really have any material impact on piracy, right? If you're a security professional and I tell you I've got this awesome security system certified potentially by the FBI in which I hide a key inside a device and then I give it to my adversary and then I cross my fingers and hope the adversary never extracts the key, they will tell you that your security model is not a good one, right? It's Alice and Bob and Carol, not just Alice and Bob. When Netflix says, okay, here's what we're going to do. We want to preserve the illusion that there's such a thing as streaming that isn't downloading, as though the internet were a cunning series of tubes and mirrors and there was a way to make an image appear on your screen without you downloading the file that represents that image. And in order to preserve this consensus hallucination, we are going to encrypt the movie that we send you, and then we're going to give you a client that doesn't have a save button, and we're going to rely on the idea that you will never look too closely at that client and figure out where we hid the key and make your own client that has a save button and shatter the consensus hallucination, and we all get to take the red pill. They are not engaged in robust security practice, because normally you have Alice and Bob who want to protect their keys from evil Carol, but in Netflix model you've just got Alice and Bob. Netflix is Bob, you are Alice. Bob wants to send Alice a key. Bob doesn't want Alice to have the key. There's a problem for Bob, right? You can join the cohort of Alice by getting a Netflix subscription. So it doesn't take any special nous to become Alice. If you're a bored grad student with your own tunneling electron microscope and nothing to do this weekend and a bunch of undergrads hanging around taking up space like a bad smell, you can become Alice for $9.95 a month, $8.71 if you get the basic package, and have at that device, and once you've found the keys, the model falls apart. So if DRM doesn't work and never has worked, and every DRM consortium spends millions of dollars in years designing DRMs that Norwegian teenagers break for shits and giggles in half an hour the week after it ships. Why do they keep doing it? And the reason they keep doing it is the DMCA. Because although the DMCA doesn't make imaginary crypto models work, it does give you the power to punish anyone who points out that the emperor has no clothes. And so if you are making a CD player, you are making a device to play back CDs that don't have any DRM on them, and you don't have to, there's no legal stipulations about what you can do. You don't have to license any IP to play back a CD. You just make a CD player that has all the features that you want. If those features are lawful, then you get to add them to your player. And that's why if you have a computer that still has an optical drive and you stick a CD in it, it wakes up and manufacturer-supplied software launches, and it says, I see you've joined us from the last century. I would like to make your music compliant with the 21st century. Would you like me to rip, mix, and burn it? And you click yes, and then it's on your phone and you can listen to it for free. You bought the CD, you can play it back for free on your phone. But if you're making a DVD player, although the code to decrypt DVDs has been extant on the internet for more than a decade, using that code is a felony. And so you have to license a key from a consortium in order to play back the DVD, and that license comes with conditions prohibiting you from adding legal features. And that's why if you take a DVD, which is 20 years old this year, and you stick it in your computer, the manufacturer-supplied software will launch, and it will allow you to do exactly what you could do in 1996 when the DVD first was created. It will let you watch it, and that's it. If you ask your computer to turn the DVD into a 21st century movie that you can watch on your phone, your computer's response is not yes, master, it's I can't let you do that, Dave, right? So if you want to watch that movie on your phone, what you've got to do is buy the movie again. Not because the law says that it's illegal to transcode a video file that you have lawfully acquired and move it onto a new device, but because the law says that removing a digital lock, even one that has been comprehensively broken for more than a decade, is a felony. And so manufacturers are bound to omit features that customers would want in a real, robust market where firms produce products that they believe consumers demanded in the market. And so, although you and I know that the magic incantation handbrake or VLC will get our movies onto our phones, normal humans don't know this. And I don't mean moms. Stop comparing people who don't know technology to your mom. Nobody cares about servicing moms with technology, which means that every mom has to be a hardcore technology ninja and figure out technology that was not designed with her in mind. I mean bosses, because bosses are the people who get to call up the CIO and say, I don't care what your security model says. I'm in the lobby of a Comfort Inn, and as soon as this kid gets off the PC, I'm going to check my email with it, so you figure out how I'm going to get on my email, right? People who never have to have technology, have to understand how technology works in order to make it work, will never find out about Handbrake and will never find out about VLC. No one will ever put Handbrake or VLC in the point of sale at a Walmart. No one will ever advertise it on the side of a bus, and no one's ever going to raise VC for it. And so this business model that lets you charge money for stuff that people rightfully should get under the law, that lets you prohibit activities that no legislature has ever banned, this business model is incredibly attractive, and this is why DRM has metastasized into the rest of the world. It doesn't increase sales, right? Nobody woke up this morning and said, gosh, you know what I want? I want to read a book, but I don't want that book to do as much as the books I used to own. I wonder if anyone's selling a restricted book, right? All DRM can do is sell to people who are indifferent to your DRM, or to people who will hold their nose and get your DRM, or people who don't know your DRM. But no one has ever bought because there's a DRM tick box on the side of the product. It creates revenue by suppressing competition, not by allowing, making an attractive proposition in a free market. So when you look at how that's moved into hardware, you can see that it's become incredibly attractive, not just for people who make entertainment technology, but for people who make anything that has code in it, anything that is a copyrightable work that you can skin with the minimum viable DRM that lets you invoke federal law to protect your business model. DRM allows you to control features, right? So say you are making a smart thermostat, And you can sell them onesie-twosies to individual homeowners, but what you really want is for a power company to buy hundreds of thousands or millions of them and put them in all of their subscribers' houses, right? And what they get to do is something pretty awesome, right? If the power hits peak load, and the alternative would be to fire up a coal power generator to meet that peak, instead of firing up the coal generator, they can reach into the homes of all of their subscribers and turn their air conditioner down by 1 degree or turn their furnaces down by 1 degree. And that's great news for the power company, but if you're going to make that sale and you're going to close it, you're going to want to be able to promise the power company's purchaser that as soon as they turn down everyone's air conditioner, everyone won't be able to go and turn it back up again. And so what you can say is, look, we've got an app store for our thermostat, and that app store does not include an app that lets you turn your thermostat back up, and we will never certify that app. And if you buy these from us, then you can be sure that your customers, the only way your customers could change their thermostat is by committing a felony. And certainly no one will be able to offer them that product. And so you're sitting pretty. So firms love this because it lets them control their feature set, which helps them make sales. Firms also love it because it lets them control their parts and service channels. So every car today has not great security, but enough DRM to make it a felony to read the telemetry from the car without the manufacturer's permission. And if you're going to service a car, you need the telemetry off of its CAN bus. You need to know what the engine is doing. And to get that telemetry without breaking the DRM, you have to buy a tool from the manufacturer. And that tool comes with a contract that says you're only going to buy parts from the manufacturer. And so if you want to charge parts prices, margins that are so high that in a real market you would expect competitors to spring up and start offering cheaper parts, you can do that and prevent anyone from being able to sell those cheaper parts by making sure that no one can diagnose a car without paying money. It lets you control information flows. Every summer, the Copyright Office holds hearings into whether or not Section 12.1 of the DMCA has gone too far, and every summer they find it has gone too far. Last summer was a particularly poignant example of this, though, because they heard from Kyle Wiens and his colleagues at the American Corn Growers Association. So you may know Kyle Wiens. He lives in San Luis Obispo. He runs a company called iFixit. They make the best third-party manuals for gear. If you need to fix something, you get your manual from iFixit. They do teardowns. They sell parts. They sell toolkits. And Kyle gets weird phone calls. So he got a phone call one day from a farmer who had like a $500,000 John Deere tractor that wouldn't go. The reason it wouldn't go is it has a wheel inflation sensor, and the wheel inflation sensor was faulty, and it thought he had a flat, and he didn't have a flat. And he'd called up John Deere and said, I need root on my tractor so I can override this dumb sensor. And Deere said, you don't get root on your tractor. And he said, like, have you ever heard making hay while the sun shines? Like, I don't get to wait while you FedEx a part. Like, I want to drive my tractor now. My tractor, the operative word here being mine. And Deere said no. And the more we delved into why Deere had put DRM on their tractors, the weirder it got. So for one thing, Deere wants to control the part stream and make sure that you buy your parts from authorized Deere dealers who, instead of third parties who might be undermining their margins on consumables and on parts. But there's another thing that happens when you drive your tractor on your back 40. The torque sensors on the wheels conduct centimeter accurate soil density surveys that feed information back that is incredibly useful for doing automated seed broadcasting when it's time to sow your seeds. And Deere does not allow you to gain access to that information directly, even though that information is not a copyrightable work, and even though you generated that information by driving your own tractor around your own field. Deere makes you buy it in a package with seeds from companies like Monsanto with whom they have partnerships. But that's just like the mustache twirl, right? The full-on tinted Dr. Evil fingers is that Deere now has regional crop yield insights into the future crop yields of whole regions like Western Europe or the Horn of Africa. And Deere vends that information to people working in the futures market. So they're making like 10-figure bets on being able to control the data. Well, isn't that attractive, right? If you add minimum viable DRM, just enough DRM to have a colorable claim to being able to felonize anyone who breaks it, you get to collect information from farmers that's not copyrightable and that you never lifted a finger to generate and vend it off for billions of dollars in the world futures market. So, of course, DRM is incredibly attractive to companies. It's an attractive nuisance because the era of hardware is the era of extremely razor-thin thin margins that are whittled away right down to zero as soon as overseas vendors who aren't party to the World Trade Organization agreements or in territories where they're not enforced start knocking you off and producing your products at cost and below the cost that you can manufacture and sell it. Now, this is a huge problem from a consumer protection perspective, right? You and me and everyone we know are going to have devices that we rely on in which we are not going to have genuine property interests, right? In the sense that, you know, if something is your property, you have like tyrannical dominion over it. You get to decide what features it has and who you buy consumables from it and all the rest of it. But it's got a much bigger problem when it comes to information security because, as St. Schneier told us, information is a process, not a product. Everyone take a drink. And the way that we make security better is by disclosure, is by people coming forward and telling customers and the market that this product that they're relying on not to kill them in 11 ways, this product has a defect in it that can be exploited by bad guys who don't have their best interests at heart. Maybe that's state actors from rival countries. You know, I come from Canada. We lost Nortel to state-sponsored hacking. Or maybe it's griefers, or maybe it's voyeurs, or maybe it's your own local security apparatus that may not have your best interests at heart. And the thing about the DMCA is that it bans doing anything that weakens DRM, and so firms have used the DMCA to attack and threaten security researchers who come forward with humiliating revelations about defects in their products that cost them sales in the market. So the other thing that DRM gives you isn't just the power to stop your competitors from making interoperable products. It gives you the power to silence anyone who embarrasses you by pointing out the mistakes you made when you designed your product. This is an attractive nuisance on steroids. And what we end up when you don't have disclosures is not that these devices don't have security vulnerabilities, and not that those vulnerabilities don't get discovered and exploited in the wild by bad guys. What you get in that world is a universe in which devices that we put our bodies inside of, that we put inside of our bodies, that are bound up in intimate and potentially lethal ways with our daily existence, are reservoirs of long-lived digital vulnerabilities ready to be exploited by anyone who's smart enough to find them, but not reportable on by independent security researchers. And so the Copyright Office had hearings, as I said, last summer about this problem, about the problems of Section 1201 of the DMCA and security research. And they heard from all kinds of people. This was before Dieselgate, right? Before Volkswagen was able to obfuscate its code to create a device that was like haunted by demons so that it changed what it did depending on whether you were examining it or not. This is, you know, in the old days of alchemy, they assumed that the reason they got different results every time they ran an experiment was because demons were punishing them for hubris, for looking too closely at the world. When you looked at the world, the laws of physics changed. You know, they didn't want to contemplate the possibility they were just really bad lab techs, right? So, you know, since they didn't have to go through adversarial peer review, they could just assume that the universe sneakily rearranged itself when you look too hard at it. Volkswagen built a demon-haunted car, right? They built a car where if you try to figure out what it's doing, it behaves differently than when you're not trying to figure out what it's doing. But the Copyright Office last summer heard about what the future of demon-haunted things looks like. So they heard from people who had hacked the Jeep Chrysler, right? Chrysler made this Jeep. They put a Sprint SIM in it, CDMA SIM in it. It was connected to an in-car entertainment system that lets you buy Wi-Fi hotspots as a service to entertain your children on long drives, $10, get Wi-Fi for the day. Their major security model was grounded in the idea that nobody uses Sprint, so they didn't have to worry about being hacked. Right? These researchers showed that once they were in Sprint's network, they could drive any one of these 1.4 million Chrysler Jeeps over the internet, steering, brakes, acceleration, as well as all the informatics and the windshield wipers. They heard from Sammy Kamkar, who had built a device called a roll cage that opens and starts late model Fords, right, that he built for like under $20. They heard about John Deere. They heard from the chief security officer or chief security researcher of Rapid7, a guy named Jay Radcliffe. Radcliffe is a type 1 diabetic, and so naturally he's interested in the informatics and security of medical implants. And when he started to investigate the insulin pump his doctor wanted him to wear, he decided that he wouldn't touch that thing with a 10-foot pole, because although humans are terrible lab techs, especially when they're in blood sugar crisis, and even though giving yourself the wrong dose of insulin time and time again will take years off of your life, Jay Radcliffe decided that wearing a device with a wireless interface that had no adequate security and that could dump so much insulin into your bloodstream that it could kill you where you stood from 30 feet away was a bigger risk than bolusing himself with his own insulin. He estimated that 40% of all medical devices had never been subjected to external audits, and he said, my counsel didn't want me to come forward with the vulnerabilities I found because it would violate the DMCA to tell you about it. Ed Felton and a team of security researchers talked about when they were asked by the Secretary of State of Ohio to look at voting machines, and concluded that those voting machines, which had DRM and which were a felony to report on, were so riddled with security vulnerabilities that no election that they had been involved in should be certified. And they said that the only way they were able to come forward with the information about the vulnerabilities they discovered was because they'd been specifically immunized by the Secretary of State of Ohio. A voting machine is a computer we put a democracy inside of, and we have no business felonizing disclosures about material failings in those machines. Security is really hard to get right. You know that better than I do, right? I'm not a security pro. My computer science degree is honorary. I dropped out of 4 undergraduate programs and never got a real degree. You guys understand that security is super duper hard. And whatever it is that contributes to that difficulty, a prohibition on disclosure only makes it worse. Right? Yes, we have the halting state problem. Yes, we have complexity. Yes, we have law enforcement agencies that want us to introduce defects into our products. But add to all of that a system in which independent researchers can't engage in the adversarial peer review that turned alchemy into science and gave us the Enlightenment. That is something that makes a structural barrier to security that we can never overcome and that we're going to have to get rid of. Now, what does the future of a demon-haunted, DRM-infested, unsecurity reportable Internet of Things look like? Do you remember about 2 years ago, Ukraine melted down? There were demonstrators in the main square, the Maidan, who were agitating for the destruction of the state and the election of a new government, and something that actually happened, didn't end up working as well as they'd hoped it would. And they were in the square, they were under constant attack, and one day when they got home from the demonstration, their phones buzzed and they had an SMS, and it said, "This is the government. You are recorded as a participant in an unlawful demonstration. We know who you are." Well, how did that happen? Well, it happened because they had a cell site simulator, a Stingray, in the square. And Stingrays work because your phone is a computer that is adverse to you. Your phone isn't on your side, at least when it comes to its globally unique network identifier. Your phone is on the carrier's side, and your phone is designed so that you can't twiddle its globally unique identifier, because if you could beat the billing systems. And so if you set up a fake cell tower, and it pops up and says, "I am a cell tower," and announces itself, your phone by default will say, "Hi there, cell tower, this is my globally unique identifier. What services do you have for me?" And if you're a government and you have access to a database that lets you link globally unique identifiers back to phone numbers and subscriber identities, then you can stick a cell site simulator in your square and know the identities of everyone who comes to a protest. So that's what the present day looks like. But imagine what this looks like in a couple of years. In a couple of years, it might be, "Dear citizen, you are registered as a participant in an unlawful demonstration, and that's why we've reached into your smart thermostat and turned your heat off in February in Kiev." Right? So that's like maybe 5 years away. But 10 years away, it gets even scarier. There's a guy named Hugh Herr. He's the head of the prosthetics lab at the MIT Media Lab, HERR. I urge you to go look up his presentations, because he gives really good visual presentations. My idea of a good time is like a rectal thermometer for half an hour. But Herr's work he does work on prostheses in which he melds computers with human bodies in ways that are profoundly moving and life-altering for the people who receive them. And he steps through these slides and videos of hands, arms, feet, even neural prostheses, deep brain stimulators to help people with otherwise untreatable depression. It's an amazing, amazing show, and his last slide is a killer, because it's a picture of him. He's climbing a mountain. He's all in Gore-Tex, super ripped, sticking to the mountain like a gecko. And he has full radial amputations at both legs below the knee, and he's wearing prosthetic legs for mountain climbing. But he's been standing and walking around like this. And he goes, oh yeah, didn't I mention? And like, forget Steve Jobs and one more thing. He takes his legs and he puts them up and he rolls up his pants legs and he shows you that he is robot from the knee down. And he starts running up and down the stage doing mountain goat leaps. It is an amazing finale. Sorry, spoiler alert. But the first question he got when I saw him do this was, how much did your legs cost? And the price he named, you could buy a big house in Nob Hill in San Francisco or on the Lower East Side, right? The second question he got was, well, who can afford those legs? And he said, why, everyone can afford those legs, because if it's a choice between a 40-year mortgage on a house and a 40-year mortgage on your legs, you're going to take the legs, which I think is true. But what does it look like when you are the user of a computer that you don't own and you have a debtor-creditor relationship with that computer? Well, last year the New York Times ran an article about the 1 million cars on American roads that were purchased with subprime loans. It's sort of the next chapter of subprime loans for houses. And the way subprime loans work is that in order to maximize return on them and allow for easy repoing of loans where people default, is they have location-aware networked ignition overrides on the car's engine. And if you miss payment, they can immobilize your car. If you go out of the zone that you have contractually agreed to stay within, they can immobilize your car. The New York Times featured this woman who'd crossed the county line, not realizing it, to take her kids for a walk in the woods. They got back to the car. The car had switched itself off. I can't let you do that, Dave. No cellular service. They had to walk out to the highway and hitchhike home. That is the intended consequence of that car. That is how it's supposed to work. But no language on earth contains the phrase as well secured as a car dealership. And so griefers routinely log in to car dealerships and immobilize their entire fleet using this facility, because as Anton Chekhov taught us, when you put a gun on the mantelpiece in Act 1, it will go off by Act 3. Now, combine Hugh Hare and his rent-to-own legs and the subprime car market, and you get legs that, if you miss a payment on them, walk themselves back to the repo depot. Combine that with demands for backdoors, and you get legs that the police can immobilize, and that anyone who can successfully impersonate a police officer can also immobilize. The gentleman before was speaking about CALEA, the mandate to have wiretapping backdoors in our switches. He didn't mention that Greece has no CALEA law, but their switches are CALEA compliant because what people want to make switches for the US market. And in 2005, during the Greek Olympic bid, someone turned on the CALEA backdoor and wiretapped the Prime Minister and the entire Parliament using the CALEA facility, because we really don't know how to make backdoors that only good guys can go through. And the only reason we found out about it is they forgot to erase their logs. And presumably, there have been other instances in which the logs were erased. So that future is a future that I am terrified of. Now, people ask me if I'm optimistic or pessimistic. And I'm a science fiction writer, and I know as a science fiction writer that science fiction writers have no business trying to predict the future, and optimism and pessimism are by way of predicting the future. Science fiction writers, when they predict the future, they're like Texas marksmen, right? They fire the shotgun into the side of the barn and draw a target around the place where the pellets hit. In a more significant way, it doesn't matter whether you're optimistic or pessimistic about the future, right? If you were optimistic about the future, if you thought, you know what, we are going to overcome these problems. We're going to figure out how to stop pretending that math isn't real and that we know how to make backdoors. We're going to have evidence-based technology policy that's fit for purpose and doesn't treat the internet as a glorified video-on-demand system or a jihadi recruiting system or the world's greatest pornography distribution system, and treats it with the respect that it deserves as the nervous system of the 21st century. Even if you believe that that was going to happen, you should get up every morning and do everything you could to make sure that that happened. And if you were pessimistic and you thought that dumb entertainment laws from the last millennium were going to be used to create a science fiction dystopia that makes Kafka look like My Little Pony, if you thought that we were going to get Huxley'd into the full Orwell, you should still get up every morning and do everything you could to prevent that from happening, because you've got posterity to think about. You don't want your kids to live in that world, even if you think it won't arrive until after your own death. So rather than being optimistic or pessimistic, I've adopted a program from the last election campaign. I've adopted hope. And hope is the necessary but insufficient precondition for having a better future. Hope is why when your ship sinks in the middle of the ocean, you tread water. Not because you think that you're going to be rescued, but because everyone who was ever rescued treaded water until rescue arrived. And hope is what lets you, if you are treading water in open sea, help your friends and loved ones who can't tread water for themselves and put their arms around your neck and kick twice as hard for them. And we know lots of people who have to be carried along with us into this. People who have not yet realized how dangerous this is. But we're at the peak indifference moment, right? There will never be a moment from here on in which fewer people realize that information security is one of the great determining factors of the quality of our future lives. There will never be a moment after today in which fewer people care about that. Every week or two from now on, there will be ghastly, horrific breaches that destroy the lives of millions of people, from OPM and Ashley Madison to all the various retailers who've breached. And over again, millions of people are going to turn up on your doorstep and say, I'm ready to start kicking for myself. And so if we have hope, we can make a better future. So I went back to the Electronic Frontier Foundation after a 10-year hiatus to work on this project, the Apollo 1201 project, a project to kill all the DRM in the world in a decade and make the future safe for human habitation. And I'm here to ask you to help us with it. Here to ask you to help us fight for the users. That's my email address, Cory@EFF.org. I'm easy to find. And there are a bunch of things that you as security researchers and security professionals particularly can do to help us with this. The first thing is that the World Wide Web Consortium, the W3C, that makes the open standards that the web runs on, has decided in a really ill-advised moment to standardize DRM for the web. And that means that everything controlled with a web browser, which is going to be everything, right? It's going to be pacemakers and thermostats and HVAC systems and cars. Everything controlled with a web browser will be off limits to security research, lest you violate the DMCA and face punishing liability. We have an open letter to the W3C from security professionals asking them to adopt a policy that extends their existing IPR policy that says if you're a member of the W3C and you help make DRM standards, you have to promise not to use them to sue security researchers who report vulnerabilities in those implementations. And I would love it if each and every one of you would send me an email today, Cory@EFF.org, so that we can help the W3C do the right thing and protect the users and protect your colleagues who find and report vulnerabilities in critical infrastructure that put the people that we love at risk. Many of you may work for W3C members. If you work for a W3C member, you can really help me, because we are trying to get enough W3C members to block the charter of the DRM working group unless they adopt this policy. And so again, write to me if you're a member of the W3C, you work for a member of the W3C, and I'll help work with you to get your organization to help us there. And then finally, this is my colleague, Shahid Buttar. He's our outreach coordinator for universities and post-secondary institutions and high schools. And if you're an academic, if you work in an academic environment, if your kids are in high school and you are the advisor to their computer science club, please get in touch with Shahid. That's his email address, shahid@EFF.org. We are setting up campus clubs at high schools and universities all around the world to incubate a generation of technology professionals and interdisciplinary professionals from every discipline who take this stuff seriously, who think that privacy and freedom on the electronic frontier are every bit as important as they are in the real world, and to stem the tide of privacy nihilism and to make a future that we can all inhabit. So I think that's my time. Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you for your support of Electronic Frontier Foundation, and thank you for the chance to speak.